Welcome to another wonderful Grace Austen audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Regency romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Grace Austen, Regency romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The New Governess of Chiswick. Chapter 1. Letitia Coney and the seafaring man had been keeping company for several months before she realized she was falling in love with him. He seemed to be falling for her, too, which was a continual surprise to Letitia. Not many men were willing to look beyond her deformity. Not many men were willing to pretend that she didn't walk with a decided limp. However, when the Henley set sail for the East Indies on the 9th of August, Richard Lopez wasn't on board. He had come down with a mysterious illness that might have been consumption or might have been a cold, the chief symptoms of which were watery eyes, a runny nose, and a desire to hang around the Coney home at all hours. None of the Coneys were fooled, but none of them seemed to mind, either. By now, Richard had been loitering around long enough that even Mrs. Coney didn't complain when he showed up midway through the morning meal wearing a blue cloak flung about his shoulders, or when he appeared beneath Letitia's bedroom window to serenade her with his flamenco guitar. Yet Richard Lopez had never broached the subject of romance or marriage. Letitia waited patiently, for it would be inappropriate for her to bring it up. Even her father had been loath to discuss it with either her or Richard. One late summer afternoon when Richard should have been in his chambers recovering, he invited Letitia out in his carriage to Kensington Gardens. She felt she could bear his silence on the matter no longer. "Richard," she ventured, "does your family know about us? I mean to say, do they know about me?" "Do you mean have I told them about how much time we spend together?" asked Richard. "Why, of course." Letitia breathed a sigh of relief. She had never met Richard's parents. They lived in Valencia, Spain, in an old home that had sheltered French soldiers during the war, but Richard had spoken of them often and Letitia felt a fierce urge to win their approval. She paused a moment to admire a colorful assembly of tulips and forget-me-nots. Kensington Garden bore an intoxicating scent she had long associated with spring and first love. "I hope you only told them good things," she said, praying he had not disclosed anything regarding her deformed leg. Richard laughed his infectious laugh and placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "What bad things would I possibly tell them about you? I dare say you could think of something." Letitia was conscious of her chaperone glowering at them, as if wishing they were standing at least 3 feet further apart. Letitia decided that if Richard could ignore her deformity, then she could, too. "For example, sometimes I sleep late. Sometimes my imagination gets the better of me and then I stay up all night worrying that father will die or that you'll return home and I'll be left alone. You worry too much." Richard didn't touch her, but she knew that if he could have done so, he would have leaned forward and kissed her on the forehead in that moment. "Your father is in fine health, his investments are thriving, and at present I have no reason to leave London, nor any reason why I should want to." Letitia's father was a wealthy investor who had recently funded the building of 3 ships, the Carpathia, the Winifred, and the Henley, on the last of which Richard was a crewman with the promise of rising to captain. "I suppose not," said Letitia. "Though father has made some unfortunate investments in the past, recall the disaster with the man-sized fox traps, and I worry that one of these days his luck is going to run out." "Again, with the worrying," said Richard in a reassuring tone. "I have lost friends before," said Letitia, her fingers curling around the stem of a nasturtium. "Is that all you consider me?" he asked. "A friend?" Letitia froze with her hands on the flower. She had wanted to ask him this exact question without knowing how to bring it up. "What else would I consider you? There are other things than just friends. Sometimes when a man and a woman spend enough time together." There was no need to finish the sentence. Letitia turned and placed her hands on his chest, not quite ready to look him in the face. "Do you mean?" "I do." This time, to her immense relief, he really did lean forward and kiss her on the forehead. A sensation of warmth flooded through her, and it was all she could do not to wrap her arms around him. But she could feel the footman's eyes on them. When they broke away, she spotted an old woman behind the shrubs watching them through a pair of opera glasses with a look of disdain. Letitia didn't care. There was a lightness in her limbs, and on the way home the sun glowed red on the granite stones like a light from another world. They had left Kensington Garden and returned home to Grosvenor Square through the broad streets of Mayfair, past terraced houses and square-gated gardens, the air smelling of jasmine and wisteria and lavender, past women pushing prams and carrying parasols, and men in their jackets placidly smoking cigars. Mayfair at dusk had the air of a permanent holiday, and that was what they were embarking on, thought Letitia as she hobbled up the front steps of her house, a holiday of 40 or 50 years' duration in which every day would be better than the one before. But her dreams began to dissolve like soap bubbles almost from the moment the two of them set foot inside the house. Benjamin Coney, a man of 54 with greying whiskers and a stern, sober visage, was agitatedly pacing the floor of the dining room in a waistcoat and tweed cap, arguing vociferously with someone Letitia couldn't see. Every moment or two, he would examine the watch he was wearing on a chain, as if to make sure time was still running at the usual pace. Obviously none of us could have seen this coming, he muttered. Damnable business. Came a voice from near the bay windows, and I'm afraid it was one bad investment too many. You might as well pack it in, Coney. The game is over. There's no coming back from this. Letitia paused near the divan with a sudden feeling of foreboding. She placed an arresting hand on Richard's arm. They glanced nervously at each other in the fading light. It was not a bad investment, said Mr. Coney, it was just bad luck. By all accounts, it was the worst storm seen in the Indian Ocean in the last quarter century. Nothing could have prepared us for this. Perhaps, his companion said grimly, but there are also reports that production was down and that the ships weren't properly inspected. Surely you must have known this, and if you did not, then I must question whether you pay sufficient attention to your investments. What are you implying? Mr. Coney demanded, clearly outraged. I am not implying, I am saying it outright, returned the other coolly. Some of us feel that you have become, well, detached and careless, investing your money generously but not your attention. And so, mishaps happen. And they keep happening. And they never seem to stop happening. By now, Letitia and Richard had nearly approached the door. She could see the man leaning against the counter in the dusky light, wearing a bowler hat. He held a cigar in one hand, and between each sentence he harshly pinched at it, so that by the end, he had crushed it beyond recognition. At any rate, he said finally, tossing the remains of the cigar down on the gleaming table, it is not my place to tell you how to manage your affairs, but I think you had better begin making provisions for your wife and children. They're going to need them, probably sooner rather than later. You are right about one thing, Williams, said Mr. Coney, gesturing to the door. It is not your place. Good day to you. Williams didn't so much as acknowledge Letitia or Richard as he brushed past them on his way through the sitting room and out the front door. With a mounting feeling of dread, Letitia crept into the still dimly lit dining room. Her father was now seated at the table absently smoking his own cigar, heedless of where the ashes were falling. Father, she said slowly. Father, why was that man here? Mr. Coney glanced up in surprise, having only just noticed her. What? Oh, yes, that. Terrible business. What business? Richard demanded. I am afraid our ships have been sunk, along with our fortunes. All three of them, down at the bottom of the ocean with all hands. Your captain, your crewmates, all of them as dead as that geranium on the side table there. He said the words quietly and callously, as if unaware of their import. But sadness and something like terror hovered at the back of his eyes. With a low gasp, Richard sank down into the chair opposite and placed his head in his hands. For a moment, no one spoke. What is to become of us? Letitia finally said into the silence. That I cannot tell you, said her father. I am sure I shall think of something. But she'd heard the note of finality in the other man's voice, and it left her with the uneasy suspicion that her father wasn't confronting the reality of the situation. Perhaps he was still in shock. She felt some of that herself. Just a few minutes ago, the future had seemed bright and full of promise. But now, they were likely to be turned out of their home. They would have to seek smaller lodgings, and she might even have to find work until the time when she and Richard could Wednesday. Instinctively, her hand reached for Richard's shoulder. Somehow it felt wrong to seek refuge in him when he had just lost his fellow crew members. But right then, he was the only refuge she had. "You will find another type of work," she said low in his ear. "Maybe not at sea and maybe not with my father, but somewhere. We will get through this." But there was a question in her tone that she couldn't keep out. "I don't know. I don't know." Richard threw up his palms in a gesture of helplessness. "Half an hour ago, I thought I knew what my future held. But this changes everything." The word everything crashed through Letitia's senses. Did he mean? He stood and began walking toward the door, his face pale. Letitia followed with a sense of increasing desperation. "Where are you going?" "Home, probably." His eyes seemed to be looking everywhere but at her. "Home to ponder and maybe pack my belongings. I think I shall return to Valencia and my parents for a season." It took all of Letitia's restraint not to grab him and hold him there. They had only just declared their possible future together and now he was leaving. And for how long? Forever? Of course, he would deny it, but there was something in the tone of his voice. "I will write to you when I am settled," he said as he reached for his hat. "In the meantime, perchance you might look for work yourself. You could secure a position as a teacher or governess. You are smart and qualified enough." Letitia stared at him as her entire future disintegrated into nothing. Secure a position? She scoffed at the notion. Although the Coneys didn't come from old money, they had been wealthy long enough now that the idea of having to work a demeaning job was foreign to her. She could feel the bile rising in the back of her throat. "I cannot," she said. "I wouldn't know what to do. I shall wait for you." They stood for a moment in silence and she shut her eyes, waiting for the press of his lips against her forehead. But instead, he touched her arm in a dismissive way. "I'll come back for you," he said, staring down at his shoes. "I promise." She followed him to the carriage and watched with an unsettled feeling as he took the reins in hand. "Goodbye, Richard." Her voice sounded far away, as if she were hearing it from across a great distance. "I shall see you again in a few weeks, or a few months at most." But Letitia knew, as the carriage disappeared down the broad lane, that they had just spoken for the last time. She would never see him again. Chapter 2. Marston House in Chiswick, London, stood at the end of a road known locally for its cypress trees and leafy cedars. The fluted columns of its facade and the imposing dome upheld by an octagonal design never failed to inspire awe in visitors. When Letitia Coney arrived for an interview at the end of March, her first thought was that she was entering a great palace, the kind of home a queen might retire to during the winter. The thought filled her with trepidation. Letitia had been searching for work as a governess ever since her father's investments had floundered the summer before. So far, she had been interviewed by 9 people and rejected by 8. What was worse, the one person who had hired her sent a note the next morning withdrawing the offer. He never explained why he had rescinded, although her father had some theories. "He probably found out that you're the daughter of the infamous Mr. Coney of 18, Grosvenor Square. My name has been poisoned with London's business class ever since the disaster." "But I had nothing to do with that investment," said Letitia, alarmed. "It does not matter," said Mr. Coney. "These people are notoriously unforgiving." The thought of her father's failures preventing her from being employed burned a hole of worry in Letitia's stomach. Having already been rejected over and over, she was beginning to worry that she was unemployable. So, it came as a relief when Lawrence Drake, the Earl of Mintford, informed her by letter that he was seeking a governess for his niece and would like to meet her for an interview at his Chiswick estate. Worry continued to gnaw at her as her father's barouche pulled up to the estate on that rainy Monday. A footman in blue livery stood waiting at the end of the now muddy drive. He helped her down from the carriage and escorted her up a double flight of marble steps flanked on either side by stone statues of lions. Letitia stared silently up at the dome, feeling overwhelmed. It occurred to her that the house might be too rich for her, and that the Earl might want to hire someone better. Someone whose father wasn't entangled in financial difficulties. Someone whose legs were the same length, and who wasn't forced to walk with a limp. Letitia had hidden her deformity by wearing shoes of different heel sizes. The heel of the shoe on her left foot rose higher than the heel of the shoe on the right, making her legs roughly even. But the left shoe was clunky and ugly and made a great deal of noise as she ascended the marble stairs into the house. She grimaced in embarrassment, feeling sure every servant in the house could hear her coming. The humiliation continued as the still silent footman led her through a narrow foyer, past an elaborate sitting room containing a chandelier, lavish furnishings, and several portraits in gilt frames, and up a flight of stairs. Her family had not been poor until very recently, but the interior of this house was several degrees of magnitude fancier than hers had ever been. Antique rosewood and mahogany furniture furnished the rooms and dining hall, and the bookshelves were inlaid with marble and stacked to bursting with volumes bound in leather. The Earl of Mintford was seated at a desk in his study finishing what looked to be a letter. He appeared annoyed that Laetitia had arrived before he had finished it. Reluctantly, he put it away in a drawer, along with his quill pen, and invited her to sit down in the chair facing him. Laetitia knew nothing about him other than that he was rumoured to be a widower, although he didn't look much older than 25 with his black hair neatly combed and his narrow, clean-shaven face. He wore a sober brown coat over a white linen shirt, pale pantaloons, and leather-top boots that were newly polished, suggesting a level of care with his dress that she in her simple gown could only envy. "If you secure this position," he said, "and that is by no means certain, you will be looking after my niece, Lydia. I'm not her legal guardian, thankfully, although her parents entrusted her to my care during their year-long trip to Calcutta. I tried to talk them out of going, but they were set on it." "How old is Lydia?" 6 years old on April 1st. "You'll be teaching her the basics of reading and penmanship, nothing you don't already know, presumably. I understand that you also speak French, which I would like my niece to learn." There was a hint of condescension in his voice, and Laetitia wondered if he was ridiculing her. She didn't want to confront him about it for fear of upsetting him and finding the interview abruptly cancelled. The Earl pulled the quill pen from the drawer and began writing notes to himself as they spoke. He seemed tired and world-weary, like someone who had lived too long and was ready to let go. Laetitia consoled herself with the thought that if she didn't get the position, it might not be the worst thing. "If taken on, you will be expected to live here in one of the guest rooms. There are a lot more of them available than there used to be. Recently, a couple of unpleasant setbacks forced me to dismiss most of the staff. Now I am away often, traveling in other parts of the country, and only return when I absolutely must." "Who is left?" asked Laetitia, wondering what could have compelled him to dismiss nearly his whole staff. "Only a single maid, a contemptible chef who drinks too much sherry and whom I love like my own family, a groom, a gardener whom I acquired quite recently, and, potentially, a governess. I hope you will not mind living in a house with such few people. I think I would prefer that, actually. So, you will not be here often." The Earl rotated his stiff shoulders, looking slightly annoyed by the question. "I'll stay for the first week or so to see how you're getting on. After that, I will visit my mother in Bristol. I haven't seen her since the funeral, and she's getting on in years. I noticed as you were coming into the room that you seemed to be limping. Is your leg injured?" "If you mean have I injured it, no," said Laetitia, her cheeks burning. "I was born like this. One of my legs has always been shorter than the other." When he failed to respond, she added, "Will that be a problem?" "No, but it is most unusual. My younger brother came down with a sickness in childhood that nearly killed him, and he has walked with a cane ever since." "Then you are probably used to hearing someone clunking about at all hours," said Laetitia. "The noise will not bother you." "Perhaps," he said with a shrug. "I could not tell you. I haven't seen this particular brother in over 15 years. There was a momentary pause in which Laetitia wondered whether his brother had died. "I will try to walk softly." Without glancing up from his writing, the Earl waved his hand in a dismissive gesture. "Half the time I will be elsewhere and you can stump around as much as you want. The only thing I ask is that you do your job and try to get along with the other domestic staff. And this will be challenging." "So many questions," said the Earl, sounding irritated. "But yes, they can be difficult, some of them. Ellen Margoyles nearly drove my wife mad while she was alive, but the woman has been my cook since childhood. She's like an old dog you grow up with and you can't bear to be rid of." "Not very complimentary," muttered Laetitia, but the Earl only chuckled. Setting down his pen, he rose from the desk to signal that the interview was over. "How soon may I expect to hear back from you?" she inquired. "I still have several other candidates to interview, but if you are selected, you can expect to hear from me within 2 or 3 weeks. If I haven't written to you within a month, you can safely assume the position has been filled." The thought of having to wait that long left a nervous feeling in the pit of Letitia's stomach. It might have been bearable if she had some hope of getting the position, but she doubted it. There was always going to be someone more qualified, someone who left a better impression. On the return home, Letitia thought back over the interview, looking out over the muddy, rain-swept streets and wishing she had been less timid and less awkward. Her thumping as she came up the stairs and into the room seemed to have bothered him, and she wondered if she had disqualified herself before she even was seated. At least, she had had the good sense not to reveal her anger and irritation. She hadn't shown much emotion at all, and by the time he had interviewed 3 or 4 other women, he was likely to have forgotten about her. She sat at home and waited. 1 week passed and then 2. By the end of the 2nd week, she had fallen into a deep despair punctuated by troubled dreams in which she was forced to live on the streets, sleeping under wagon carts and begging for food. She had all but given up hope when a letter arrived from the Earl near the end of the 3rd week. "Having interviewed 8 other women and found none of them to my liking, I have accepted your offer for employment. Please present yourself at Marston Hall no later than 1st May. Not very complimentary, she thought as she read the letter over. He had only hired her by default because he couldn't find a worthier candidate. She supposed she should consider herself lucky, but still, she didn't think she would enjoy working under him knowing that he had only reluctantly hired her with no enthusiasm whatsoever. Chapter 3. Having formally accepted her position as governess, Letitia was scheduled to move into Marston Hall on May 1st. No longer having a carriage of her own, her father had been forced to sell theirs, she had to petition the Earl to send one. She was already feeling miserable and embarrassed when a lone coachman appeared at the house that afternoon, and it didn't help that when she arrived at sunset, she found the staff waiting for her outside near the front steps. One at a time they introduced themselves: Ellen Margoyles, sloppily dressed and smelling faintly of sherry; Betsy Gower, a maid who couldn't have been older than 16, and Gerald Pankhurst, a craggy-faced valet with eyebrows like large hairy black caterpillars. Once inside, Letitia met Lydia Haringey, the Earl's niece. She was wearing a beautiful green satin dress that made Letitia's gown look shabby and coarse by comparison, and a single blonde braid ran the length of her back that bobbed behind her as she rushed forward to greet Letitia. "Uncle Lawrence says we're to be friends," she said eagerly, "and he asked me to show you all over the house." "That was very gracious of him," said Letitia, immediately charmed by the child's innocence and enthusiasm. Lydia didn't seem spoiled or arrogant like some other rich girls Letitia had known. "Which is your favorite room in the house?" "Probably the library when it's all cold outside," Lydia replied after a moment's pause. "I like sitting by the fire and reading about birds of England. And sometimes, if I haven't been misbehaving, Uncle Lawrence will read to me." "Well, we shall have to teach you to read for yourself," said Letitia, smiling in spite of herself. "If you are able to," Ellen interjected. "Lord knows, I've tried a time or 2. "You can barely read yourself," grumbled Pankhurst with a laugh. "If you tried to teach her to read, you would just confuse her permanently." "Perhaps you can teach her to make rude remarks," replied Ellen dryly. One person who was conspicuous by his absence was Lawrence Drake. As Gerard Pankhurst carried Letitia's bags for her, she scanned the rooms for some sign of him. "Where is the Earl?" she couldn't resist asking. "Probably secluded himself because he didn't want to hear all that racket," said Ellen, and the others laughed, all except Letitia, who knew exactly what she meant and didn't find it particularly funny. "Must your shoes make so much noise?" asked Gerard as they ascended the stairs together. "It cannot be helped," said Letitia, blushing. "I was born with a condition." "Condition of being a nuisance, from the sound of it," cried Ellen, who apparently fancied herself a jester. Letitia hadn't been there for more than 10 minutes, but already she was beginning to see why the Earl's late wife had not cared for the woman. Letitia was not scheduled to begin lessons until the beginning of the following week, so she had a few days to herself to settle into her new home. By the end of the first day, she had unpacked her few bags and re-established the routine she had been following for years: tea after breakfast, knitting in the afternoon if she had time for it, and an hour of writing before bed. Letitia had not told even her own family about her attempts at fiction. Fancying herself a novelist on the sly, for years she had been quietly writing lurid Gothic tales of mystery, murder, and abduction. A few of these pieces she had liked enough to submit for publication under an assumed name, a male pseudonym of course, because she doubted anyone would be interested in reading a novel written by a woman. But so far, no one had liked her stories enough to consider them worthy of being published. Discouraged but undeterred, Letitia kept writing. As it happened, the piece she was presently working on, and had been working on even before accepting the Earl's offer of employment, involved a young woman living away from home for the first time in a large and drafty old house. Letitia had embellished the story with motifs culled from her years of reading: moonlit ruins, locked gardens, a vaguely sinister estate owner who was half in love with the heroine, and mysterious screams in the night. But now that she lived there, the real world began bleeding into her fiction, so that by the end of a few chapters, she had introduced a nasty cook with a fondness for cruel jokes and a household staff who spoke about the heroine in envious whispers. And they were doing that. Following the unkind remarks made at her expense on her first night in the house, she had taken to walking around in her bare feet. As a result, she was able to creep through rooms without being noticed and had once or twice overheard the staff muttering about the new talent and the Earl's fondness for young, weak-willed women. These last words gave Letitia pause. Before leaving home, she'd had a long talk with her mother, who had warned her against allowing herself to be seduced by her employer. This was so unlikely that Letitia had dismissed the idea with a laugh, which just made her mother angry. "Hold on to your virtue," she had said, "even if it costs you your position." "The Earl didn't hire me for my looks," Letitia protested. "He's a widower, still grieving his first wife. And undoubtedly looking for a way to console himself in the meantime. I've known too many women who allowed themselves to believe that their employer was falling in love with them. In the end, the employer got what he wanted and the poor girls were left jobless and homeless, their reputation in tatters. I don't want you to end up like that." "I won't," said Letitia, feeling slightly annoyed. "I promise." But now, she wondered. The other staff appeared to have taken her mother's view of things. The one aspect everyone seemed to have agreed on was that she couldn't have been hired for her experience. Letitia had known that much when she took the job. Basically, she hadn't had a minute of experience in being a governess. When she received the offer, she assumed it must have been the grace of God looking after her. But now, she wasn't so sure. Yet if the Earl had designs on her, he showed it in strange ways. They were rarely in the same room together, and he sometimes left the room when she came into it. Once she had rounded a corner to find him talking in discreet whispers to Ellen. He stopped abruptly when she entered, and they both stared at her. She had the uncanny feeling that they had been talking about her, a feeling that was strengthened a moment later when he drew Ellen aside into another room and to resume their conversation. It was a universally held truth that in the absence of information about a person, the mind will form its own image, and the image Letitia formed of the Earl was spooky and impossibly sinister. Perhaps he had poisoned his first wife, or perhaps he was keeping her locked away in the basement or attic with a servant who brought her thin gruel and a slice of bread once a day. Whatever the particulars, there was something unsettling about him. To exacerbate things, the house was gloomy and poorly lit, and she constantly felt like she was being watched, even in her own room at night with her door shut and locked. Letitia felt increasingly disquieted. She carried an ominous feeling around inside of her, a sense that she was hours or days away from uncovering some diabolical secret. This feeling persisted even after schooling began, when she was spending hours every morning teaching Lydia spelling and grammar. When Letitia was getting ready for bed one night near the end of her first week, an ear-splitting shriek suddenly disrupted the stillness. Instantly, she knew this was the moment she had dreaded. She waited for her panic to subside. She was breathing heavily and her forehead, already warm from the stuffiness of the room, dripped sweat. She tried to calm herself, to think rationally about the situation. The scream had come from upstairs, from the attic. It was the scream of a fully grown man. It sounded like he was being tortured or beaten and was crying out for help. No one with a heart of compassion could have slept soundly in their bed after hearing such a sound. With shaking hands, Letitia finished buttoning her gown and removed the candle holder from the nightstand. Then, slowly and cautiously, she opened the door and peered out into the hallway. No one else seemed to be moving. Likely, they had all gone to bed. Perhaps they were used to the screams, or perhaps they had been trained to ignore them and not ask questions. Well, she hadn't undergone any such training, and as long as she was there, she was going to help the poor man. She didn't care if she lost her job. Her mother, she knew, would have said it was the right thing to do. Letitia crept through the dimly lit hallway, her thumps muffled by the rich rugs on the floor. It occurred to her that she had no weapons and was entering the devil's lair unprepared. A decorative vase stood on an oak stand in the middle of the hallway. She reached for it, thinking she could club the man if he tried to attack her. It was better than going in empty-handed. There was no telling what might happen to her. Upon reaching the third floor, she found someone had opened the door to the stairs leading up to the attic. Anxiety mounted as she approached. Every nerve in her body seemed to have caught fire. This was her last chance to turn back. She could go back to her room and pack her bags and be out of the house by morning. But if she kept going, she risked subjecting herself to the prisoner's fate. She might never see her parents again. Breathing a short prayer, she put her foot onto the bottom step and began quietly ascending the narrow stairs. By the light of the candle, she could see a low-roofed garret with a pallet in one corner and a large metal cage half hidden by a thick woolen blanket. Letitia felt a surge of terror at the sight of the Earl kneeling in front of it, his expression vacant and inscrutable. He glanced up in surprise as she stood there, motionless, taking in the scene. "What are you doing out of your chambers?" He was cross. "I didn't even hear you coming." "I walked quietly," said Letitia, her eyes rooted on the cage. The Earl scowled, as if wondering why she had never tried that before. "I hope you weren't already sleeping. Some nights, the screams have awoken me out of the soundest sleep." It was unnerving to think that he could speak so glibly of someone else's imprisonment. For a delirious moment, she wondered what kind of man this could be who remained untroubled by the shrieks of a man he had confined to a cage in his attic. She remembered her mother saying how many employers abused and exploited their servants. She hadn't believed it then, but now, staring into the Earl's cool and composed face, it made sense. He didn't even seem bothered by the fact that she had caught him. He had no shame. "How can you keep him chained up like that?" Letitia demanded, her voice and hands shaking, trying to see who it was that was imprisoned. "He deserves to go free." "I'll let him out for an hour or two tomorrow," said the Earl, oblivious to the panic on Letitia's face. "He does like to run. Would you care to see?" Before she could say no, he rose and began removing the blanket. Letitia felt a chill of foreboding, wondering what she was going to see when he lifted it, some pitiable, naked, half-starved man. She shut her eyes tightly, wishing she were anywhere else but here in this room. "See," said the Earl in a tone of excitement. "Isn't he precious?" "Precious?" Letitia's eyes flew open. There on a pallet in the middle of the cage sat a large grey rabbit. He was sniffing about eagerly, searching for food. It's a rabbit," she said stupidly. All the blood in her body must have been flooding to her cheeks. "Well, of course." The Earl paused, looking wary. "What did you think it was?" She didn't need to explain. It took him approximately 3 seconds to piece together the truth. "You thought it was a person." "I did." "You thought there was a person trapped in the attic?" Letitia nodded with a cold, guilty feeling. "And I suppose you thought you were coming up here to rescue him." The Earl rubbed his face wearily, as if realizing only for the first time the sort of person he had invited into his home. "It's what any Christian person would have done," Letitia said. The Earl glowered in exasperation, and Letitia's humiliation deepened. She would have preferred any number of tortures to the look he was giving her right then. "I'm sorry. I guess there was a misunderstanding," she mumbled. "I should think so," he replied. "I don't know what books you've been reading, but I'm not the sort of person who goes around locking my guests in the attic. I never was. And I would like it if you would stop investigating me as if you were exposing some sort of fiend. You won't last long in this house if you don't come to your senses, fast." Letitia stammered an apology. Tears starting to fill her eyes, but the Earl was no longer listening or looking. Throwing the blanket back over the rabbit, he brushed past her and descended the stairs, his face blank and impassive. Letitia sank down on the floor and stayed there for some time, wanting to disappear into nothingness. Chapter 4. Letitia hardly slept that night. It wasn't that she was still afraid. Having seen the Earl fawning over a cute bunny, she had a hard time believing there was anything dangerous about him. Shame gnawed at her, though. She knew that by the time she got up in the morning, everyone in the house would know about the occurrence in the attic. They would be talking and laughing about her for days. She finally slept for 2 or 3 hours and awoke feeling miserable. Her eyes were sore and her head ached. When she tried to get out of bed, it felt like a magnet was pulling her back down. But remembering the Earl's words and knowing how close she was to losing her position, she forced herself to get dressed and go downstairs into the breakfast room, where Lydia was just finishing her scones and kippers. There was a room on the ground floor across from the library that seemed to have been intended as a study. But because no one used it anymore, Letitia and Lydia had been using it for their lessons. It was cozily furnished with a couple of armchairs, an antique rosewood desk and a hearth rivaling the one in the sitting room. It was so cozy, in fact, that on mornings like this when she had been up half the night, Letitia had trouble staying awake. So did Lydia, who kept drifting off as Letitia attempted to teach her the names of the nation-states of Europe. "This map is slightly out of date," said Letitia, "as it doesn't incorporate the changes that were made last year at the Congress of Vienna. I don't see Piedmont Sardinia anywhere on here, for example." "Lydia," she added within exasperation, her tone rising, "are you paying attention?" "I am," said Lydia, stifling a yawn. "You said the King of France likes sardines. Did you stay up working on your reading last night when you should have been asleep?" "I was in bed." "Yes, I'm sure you were. You make it difficult for me to teach you when you're falling asleep during lessons." This time it was Letitia's turn to yawn loudly. "Maybe it's the weather this morning." The world outside the window was so misty and dreary that the mere sight of it made her want to go back upstairs and return to sleep. It was hard to see how they were going to get any of their lessons done at this rate. Right then, it was only 9:30. The day stretched endlessly before them and dinner seemed weeks, even months, away. Then Letitia had an idea. "Here's something my mother used to do when we were having trouble paying attention," she said. "If it wasn't too cold, we would take a walk outside until we had fully woken up. I remember we used to take turns naming the various birds that lived in our yard." "Oh, can we do that, please?" asked Lydia, already getting out of her chair. "Do you want to know a great secret?" "I do, very much." "I don't know if I'm allowed to tell." Lydia grimaced guiltily and said in a whisper, "There's a garden out back, but it's usually locked. I'm not sure Uncle Lawrence wants too many people knowing about it." Letitia's curiosity warred with her professional duties. "Well, if your uncle doesn't want us to see it, then we had better not." "Oh, but I don't think we'll get in trouble. Besides, he's not here. He's in Surrey this morning. I heard him telling Ellen. He's visiting a doctor or someone. How does one get into this garden?" "There's a key hanging up on a rack above the filing cabinet in the library." Before Letitia could stop her, Lydia darted out of the room and across the hall, her braid bouncing merrily behind her. She returned a moment in minutes carrying a set of large iron keys on a ring, the kind that jailers used to keep their wards imprisoned. "It's this one," she said, holding up one of the heavy black keys for Letitia's inspection. Letitia wondered how Lydia could tell them apart, as they all looked the same to her. Letitia took the ring warily. "Are you sure we won't get in trouble for this?" After the events of the night before, she was in no mood to take chances. "If we do, you can just tell him I made you go see it," said Lydia cheerfully. "He knows I go into the garden sometimes when I want to get outdoors, and it doesn't seem to bother him." "Why does he keep it locked, then?" Lydia shrugged. "I suppose he just likes it that way." Letitia suspected there must be more to it than that. Feeling like she was being drawn into another mystery, she allowed Lydia to lead her down a dark and windowless hallway at the side of which was a small timbered door, just small enough for a person of average height if they stooped, but presumably better suited for children and dwarfs. Letitia hesitated. No one had warned her against opening locked doors, but it still made her nervous, like she was violating some fairy tale prohibition. At Lydia's insistence, however, she inserted the key into the lock, nudged the door open, and froze in disbelief. Lydia ran ahead excitedly, beckoning for Letitia to follow. But Letitia remained motionless and gape-mouthed, wondering how something like this could have escaped her attention for so long. She wasn't sure what she had expected to find when the door opened, but it wasn't this. There in front of her, partially covered in mist, stood the largest and most elaborate garden she had ever seen. A gravel path lined with white stones opened out onto a neatly trimmed lawn, sparkling emerald, that put Laetitia in mind of the garden she'd read about at Versailles. A row of damp lilac bushes ran along a brick wall half hidden by climbing vines on the right-hand side, while yews and mountain ashes dotted the landscape at intervals, breaking up the classical precision. Tall statues stood in the garden, some of them looking like they had been imported from Greece and Rome. A bust of Charles II stood on a bronze pedestal, and Laetitia spotted a wolf and a griffin crouched in attack positions behind an arched gateway. Over a pond near the center of the garden stood a wooden bridge painted a dark red. The gravel path resumed on the other side and wound on until it reached a conservatory at the far end. There was so much to see, in fact, that the eye might never tire of looking at it. Laetitia thought she could walk out there every morning and always discover something new. "Isn't it pretty?" said Lydia, taking Laetitia by the arm and leading her out onto the gravel path. "This is my favorite place on the whole estate. The rest of the house could burn down, and I wouldn't be that upset as long as the garden stayed just as it is." "But your uncle must have a gardener," said Laetitia. "I mean, weeds and thorns would soon overrun the place if there weren't someone here to look after it." "How have I never seen him?" "It's a her, and she's hard to find. Sometimes I look for her and I can't find her. She doesn't really like anybody. And she never ever comes into the house." Laetitia followed Lydia out onto the bridge overlooking the pond, where they could see their own reflection stark against the grey sky. Near the gravelly bottom, she saw large fish making baffled expressions. The scent of yew and wisteria mingled with the smell of spring rains to create a drowsy aroma like a sleeping potion. Despite this, Laetitia felt more awake than she had all morning. The thrill of discovery had given her energy. "I miss my friends in Bristol," said Lydia sadly. She was walking along the top of a low embankment speckled with topiary hedges. "I do like Uncle Lawrence and you, but I think I would like it more if I had my friends here. We could play so many games." "You ought to write to them," said Laetitia. "My writing isn't so good yet. And I'm not sure Uncle Lawrence would want me having 5 more children in the house, whether he was here or not. I don't see why he wouldn't." Laetitia couldn't understand people who disliked children. "Why don't you have any friends here in Chiswick?" "I can't ever meet anyone. Uncle Lawrence is hardly ever here, and without him, I'm not allowed to leave the house." For the first time, Laetitia began to understand why Lydia had been in such a hurry to get outside. She promised herself that in future she would make time for them to go outside each day. "Do you ever go horseback riding?" Lydia's eyes widened in excitement. "I've wanted to go ever since I moved in. Uncle Lawrence promised he would take me, but he's been too busy answering letters and visiting friends in London. We'll go sometime." Laetitia felt a surge of affection for Lydia, who was the only person at Marston Hall who had treated her with any kindness. "I used to go horseback riding during the summers when the family took its annual trip to Bath, but I have a feeling we won't be doing that anymore." "Why not?" "Because I don't think my parents could afford it." Laetitia felt saddened. She hadn't meant to talk about that, not today. "Not ever. But you could go." "Maybe I will again someday." They followed the path into the conservatory, where they found all manner of trees and orchids and flowering bushes growing. At the far end of the building, near the door opening out into the other garden, stood a middle-aged woman wearing thick gardening gloves, a red linen dress and a straw bonnet. She turned and watched as they came toward her, looking brisk and busy. "Don't mind me," she said. "Some of our trees have blighted and I'm trying to mend them before they get seriously damaged." "How do you mend a blighted tree?" asked Laetitia. "What I usually do is spray the trunk with a solution of my own invention that mixes dung and lime." She held up a bronze watering can. "It's not complicated, but it takes a certain amount of effort. You might also build a straw fire under the trees as a preventive measure, but we should have done that months ago. Unfortunately, there was no gardener at the time and the Earl was trying to manage it all by himself." "Then you've only just arrived," said Laetitia. "What's your name?" "Rebecca Cavendish." She gave a cursory nod. "I've been working here for a couple months now, though I still live in Fulham." Laetitia took an instant liking to Rebecca, who seemed affable enough. After being routinely dismissed and ignored for the last several weeks, it was a relief to find someone who was willing to talk to her. Perhaps that was why she had found the idea of the garden so appealing. It was a place she could go to get away from the whispering and cold, sullen silences. "I suppose the original gardener must have retired," said Letitia. "Retired from life, more like," said Rebecca darkly. "Greta died last October after a nasty bout of food poisoning. By all accounts her last days were spent in pain and misery, and the staff were looking for someone to blame. Suspicion naturally fell on Ellen Margoyles, who had prepared the meal that killed her. But no one else died. That was what made it so suspicious. Greta came in one afternoon complaining of being hungry and asking if Ellen would make her something. It being late autumn, Ellen fixed her a warm chowder. But it didn't agree with her, and within an hour or two, she was complaining of stomach pains. Given the air of stillness that lingered over Marston Hall, it was easy to forget that 2 women had died there in the last year alone. A conspiracy of silence seemed to have suppressed all mention of Lady Mintford and the former gardener among the staff. Letitia wondered if this was by design, and no one brought it up because it hurt too much. "So how did you get this position of gardener? And aren't gardeners almost always men?" Letitia asked. "The Earl and I had already known each other for several years through the Horticultural Society, and I was accustomed to seeing him once or twice monthly during our meetings in South Kensington. He missed several, but then turned up in January saying he had lost his gardener and wanted to know if I would like to come and work for the estate. How could I refuse? Lady Mintford's garden parties were legendary." Garden parties? In all the weeks Letitia had been living at Marston Hall, this was the first anyone had mentioned Lady Mintford apart from her death. She'd certainly never heard a word about garden parties. Rebecca glanced warily at Letitia. Every year in the early summer, Lady Mintford used to host an elaborate garden party. "I can't believe you've never heard of it." "I knew nothing about Marston Hall until very recently," said Letitia, feeling ashamed of her ignorance. "I only found out about it when I applied for the position of governess." Well, Lady Mintford's garden parties were the talk of Chiswick. Everyone hoped to be invited, and those who attended were the envy of everyone else. She would decorate the garden with torches and lanterns and garlands and fragrant blossoms, and at some point during the evening, she would invite everyone outside to drink champagne and dance under the starlight. Letitia tried to imagine it. She wished she could have seen the house before Lady Mintford died, when the Earl was supposedly truly happy. "But I remember the Earl saying they were married for less than a year." "Yes, but they had courted for a lot longer than that. He was absolutely crushed when she died. She had been not only his wife but his best friend, and that's a rare thing in these degenerate times. I remember how he was before," Lydia piped up. "He used to smile. But now, he doesn't. He told me the other day he wants to sleep for a year. Isn't that silly? Who wants to sleep all day? Maybe it's because he's sad." "It's not the sort of thing you can really conquer," said Rebecca. "You just have to go through it, and that takes time." Letitia thanked Rebecca and led Lydia back across the garden and into the house, her head filled with a pleasant buzzing. It was only just now becoming clear to her how little she knew about the house, its hidden rooms and its haunted history. She hoped one day there would be dancing there again, and that one day the back garden would resound with revelry and laughter. "It really does feel like this place's best days are behind it," she said to Lydia as they resumed their seats in the study. "It's a shame, really." "Don't be sad about it," Lydia replied with the simplicity of a child. "Maybe that's why you're here." Chapter 5. Letitia had expected life at Marston Hall to be dangerous, unpleasant, exciting. The one thing she hadn't expected it to be was monotonous. With the exception of that first morning in the garden when a new world of discovery seemed to be opening up in front of her, she was finding life there to be dull and repetitive. Even the other staff members seemed to have forgotten about her now that the initial burst of excitement had faded. Each week, each day, seemed to follow the same basic routine. In the mornings, she would sit for a few hours with Lydia in the study going over geography or grammar or spelling. If the weather permitted, and they didn't think they would get into trouble, they might take a trip outside into the garden for no more than a few minutes, just to clear their heads. After luncheon, Letitia might visit the stables, sometimes with Lydia in tow, though she hadn't yet worked up the courage to ask the Earl whether they could go riding. In truth, she had barely seen him since his return from Surrey. After dinner, she went up to her room and worked for a few hours to finish the piece she was writing, convinced it was the best thing she had ever written. During one of his recent appearances, the Earl had given Letitia and Lydia the task of researching a murder committed by Frances Carr, Countess of Somerset, the owner of another famous house in Chiswick. Letitia was more than alarmed at such an odd assignment for a child's education. She could hardly have Lydia suffering from nightmares because of her studies. So, Letitia mumbled her agreement, knowing that she would never subject Lydia to such things at her tender age. With all the other subjects she was trying to teach, Letitia soon forgot about her agreement, but when the Earl called her up to his study unexpectedly late one morning, her heart leapt into her throat. She had made him a promise and had purposely neglected in carrying it out, and now she was going to be reprimanded. What was worse, she knew she deserved to be. She found the Earl seated at the desk in his study using the end of a quill pen to clean his nails. Some of the stiffness seemed to have gone out of him since their last meeting, like a pillow that had been beaten until it was worn in and ready for use. Letitia couldn't help marveling at how relaxed and at ease he looked. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, curious. "I did." He smiled and motioned her into the chair opposite. Letitia couldn't remember ever seeing him smile and wasn't sure whether she should be consoled or worried. "It's been a while since we've talked, and I was wondering how things are going with Lydia." Letitia breathed easier. "She's honestly lovely, and we haven't had a single problem. I've never taught before, so I'm not sure how common that is. I've heard horror stories about little girls who were stubborn and obstinate and set the curtains on fire. I feel very lucky to be teaching someone so attentive and kind-hearted." "You haven't had any problems getting her to pay attention?" "I wouldn't say it's been perfect. There are times, especially during the early mornings, when her eyes stray to the window, and I can tell she would rather be outside among the moths and sparrows." "Yes, and what girl of her age wouldn't?" To Letitia's surprise, the Earl smiled again, a wholehearted smile that seemed to warm her body from the inside out. He cleared his throat. "Would you like me to tell you what I really think?" "Yes, please," said Letitia, with a sudden sense that the conversation could go anywhere. "I think I've made a mistake in the way I've been raising her. It's been almost 4 months since she moved into this house, and there have been whole weeks when I wasn't even here to look in on her. Then, to compound the error, I was unwilling to let her outside while I was gone for fear that something might happen to her. I guess, having already my dear wife, I wasn't prepared to take chances." It was a shock to hear him speak so frankly and directly of his wife's death. Letitia murmured a few words of condolence, but the Earl dismissed the words with an impatient gesture. "My point is this. I decided to take a more active role in her care and management. I have cancelled all my engagements for the summer and don't plan to leave the house unless I absolutely must. If you don't mind my saying," said Letitia, "I've been hoping we would see more of you. Lydia seems lonely without you, and she would be delighted if you spent more time with her. I fear she doesn't often say it, but she does love you. She was excited about staying here, and it's been disappointing to find that you're always gone." The knot in Letitia's chest eased further. She had entered the room expecting to be lectured but had ended up lecturing him. The Earl winced with the pained look of someone who doesn't like what is being told but knows every word is true. "If you do not mind my asking," said Letitia, "what has brought about this change in your thinking? You know how sometimes you can hear a whisper telling you the right thing to do, but you don't always want to do it. I've known I should have been treating her with more attention and diligence, but I was, well, distracted and lacked energy to make the changes I needed to make. You look at peace with your decision now," she mused. "More alive, even. I feel more alive." The Earl grinned in a halo of satisfaction. "Having the both of you at the estate has helped. It has forced me to come out of myself and think about the feelings and needs of others instead of sleepwalking through life." Letitia felt oddly flattered. Somehow, she had affected his life, had improved it, without even meaning to. After weeks of feeling invisible and uncared for, it was encouraging to know that she had made some kind of difference in his life, however small. It was encouraging to know he had even noticed her at all. "But that wasn't the only thing I wanted to say," he went on. Letitia waited, expectant. "When was the last time you went horseback riding?" "It's been almost a year." "I miss it." "In that case, I have welcome news. I'm thinking about surprising Lydia by taking her out riding. We'll probably go out tomorrow afternoon as soon as she finishes her lessons. You are welcome to come. Her pulse increased. This, indeed, was welcome news. I would be delighted. Where are we riding? Around the estate, in the fields at the back of the house. Twice this past week, Lydia has brought up the subject of horses during dinner, and I know what she is hinting at. The girl's getting bored and restless. Well, I can't blame her. I'm getting restless, too. It is spring. It is time for a change. I wholeheartedly agree, said Lydia happily. Good. Turning back to his desk, the Earl took out a sheet of paper. Letitia could sense that the conversation was ending. Before you go, he said, was there anything else you needed to talk to me about? Letitia hesitated. There was one thing. Ever since Rebecca Cavendish had told her about the garden parties, she had been thinking how wonderful it would be to have another dance at Marston Hall. Of course, it would be incredibly presumptuous of her to make such a suggestion. After all, she wasn't the high society wife of a wealthy earl. She was just a governess living on a salary of £20 a year. But the Earl's epiphany, his commitment to spending more time with his niece, had left her with a feeling that anything was possible. Anything? He asked after a lengthy pause. Letitia shook her head, her eyes on the ground. No, nothing of importance, I mean, nothing we can't talk about later. Good. Then I shall see you tomorrow after lessons. Tomorrow, she decided as she left the study and returned to her room. Tomorrow, she would ask him. And maybe he would be in a good mood, and maybe he would even say yes. As overjoyed as Lydia had been on their first morning together in the garden, nothing could have equaled her elation when told that her Uncle Lawrence wanted to take her riding. She stared at him skeptically at first, perhaps wondering if he was making some kind of joke, and both Lawrence and Letitia had to reassure her that he meant it. After the meal that afternoon, the Earl rose and asked them to follow him. It was a balmy day, grey and cloudy, and a restless wind beat at the windows as though beckoning them outside. Letitia's hair whipped at her face as they followed him down a winding lane, past the conservatory, past a tall arboretum toward a stable where 4 horses were kennelled, among them a palomino named Guinevere, which was Lydia's particular favourite. Although Lydia assured her uncle that she had ridden horses before and knew how to ride them, he insisted on demonstrating by mounting the horse himself and leading her at a brisk trot along the field running parallel to Chiswick Road. As he did so, he offered safety instructions: don't agitate her, speak to her gently, which clearly irritated Lydia but gratified Letitia, who had never before seen him treat his niece with anything but indifference. It worried her, too, because the last thing Letitia needed was to see him behaving lovingly toward a child when she herself was beginning to like him. In truth, Letitia found herself actually admiring the Earl and looking forward to those moments when she saw him. "Do you feel ready?" the Earl inquired as he trotted past the conservatory. "I am ready," said Lydia. "So am I," Letitia thought, painfully aware of the double meaning of her words. Her eyes flashed to the Earl, hoping he couldn't read her mind, but he was focused solely on Lydia. The Earl dismounted and helped Lydia onto Guinevere, at which point Lydia's scowl faded and was replaced by a broad smile. Seeing that the Earl, too, seemed to be enjoying himself, Letitia took the opportunity to bring up the question she had been wanting to ask him. "I realize this is probably going to sound strange coming from a governess," she said, "but I have a request." "What's that?" She hesitated, overcome by nervousness. "Well, it's been a while since you've had a dance at Marston Hall." "Yes?" His expression was inscrutable but discouraging. "And I thought we might have one this summer. That is to say, I would like us to have one. I think it would lift the spirits of the staff, who have also been getting restless and are ready for a change. I believe it would thrill Lydia and also me." "I see." The Earl continued to follow Lydia with his eyes. "And who do you expect to arrange and host this party in the absence of a mistress?" "I could be your mistress, I mean," heat surged to her face. "Oh, I didn't mean that at all." "I know what you meant," he said shortly. "Pray, continue." "I just meant that I would be willing to organize and prepare everything. I don't know if it would be permissible for someone in my position to participate, but I don't see any reason why I couldn't help in other ways. I realize how presumptuous this must seem. I think you make a good case. We haven't had a ball in. Well, I think the last one was 2 years ago, and we're due for one. Maybe it's time for Marston Hall to cast off its mourning and be reconciled to the world. Letitia hadn't expected him to acquiesce so easily, and she half wondered if maybe he was having a joke at her expense. Then, you mean? I think we should have a ball. And I don't have any problem with, his face went white. Lydia! Lydia's horse had collapsed as if being pulled to the ground by an invisible hand. To Letitia's horror, Lydia flew over the horse's head and went tumbling off with a loud cry into a shrub. Letitia had never seen the Earl move so quickly. In an instant, he had raced to Lydia's side and taken the crying child up in his arms, patting her shoulder and stroking her back reassuringly. Guinevere remained motionless, her eyes closed. Letitia couldn't tell if the horse was alive or dead. The Earl looked up at Letitia. Run inside and get Gerald. Tell him to get a coach ready and bring it out here. Frozen in panic, Letitia couldn't tear her eyes from the girl. Lydia, can you move your legs? Get Gerald, please, the Earl shouted impatiently, loud enough that she flinched. Letitia turned and ran back down the lane toward the house as fast as her wobbly gait would allow her. Her head filled with horrible visions. If something were to happen to Lydia, this was all her fault. If she hadn't encouraged the Earl to take her out riding today, it might never have happened. Letitia found Gerald in the salon. As soon as she explained the situation, he set down the bottle of borax he was holding and went running for the stables. By the time he emerged, leading a grey mare, the Earl was marching solemnly toward them carrying the girl in her arms. She's lucky not to have broken her neck. If she hadn't fallen into the shrub, it could have been a lot worse, he said tersely. I don't want to think about it, said Letitia, after running to him. What happened to Guinevere? That I don't know yet. She's not dead. She seems to have fainted. A horse faint. Letitia struggled to keep pace with him. Gerald, we're going to Surrey. Surrey? Letitia asked. To see my physician friend. He'll be able to tell if Lydia's seriously injured. But all the way to Surrey? Is there no one closer? No one as good. He was already maneuvering the child into the carriage. How long are you going to be gone? Probably for a few days. Gingerly, she reached forward and brushed the hair out of Lydia's eyes. Just bring her back safe. Shall I accompany you? No. Make arrangements for the ball. I want the girl to have something to look forward to. Letitia stared at the Earl in disbelief. So much had happened in the last 10 minutes that she had nearly forgotten about her request, which now seemed so frivolous. You really want me to? Make it a good one, were his parting words. Chapter 6. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of suspense and anticipation. Wherever Letitia went in the house, she found the other staff members huddled together discussing the spring ball. Everyone wanted to participate. It felt like years since any joy had been allowed at Marston Hall. She came downstairs one morning to find Ellen Margoyles dramatically flinging open the sitting room windows, flooding the room with amber light. You've no idea how many times I've wanted to ask him about a party, she told Letitia. We had all discussed it amongst ourselves, but no one thought he would agree, so we never tried. I'm surprised it worked, said Letitia, who had suddenly found herself in the unlikely position of being admired and envied by everyone in the house. She had the ear of the Earl, and what was more, she was able to sway him, to move him like no one else. While the Earl was in Surrey with Lydia, who was recovering nicely according to the latest correspondence, Ellen and Letitia worked together to organize the ball. Invitations were delivered, menus were printed, and decorations were arranged. It was a strange feeling, having this much command over the workings of a house that wasn't even hers, strange but exhilarating, and Letitia thought she could get used to it. On a warm spring day when the sparrow sang in the hedge and the marigolds bloomed in the flower garden, Letitia borrowed one of the Earl's horses and rode into Fulham, where she bought a modest muslin gown, pale blue, almost the exact colour of a robin's egg. She tried it on that night in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom and could hardly believe how pretty she looked in it. Her cheeks had taken on a rosy glow, and her eyes fairly glittered with excitement and interest. Even with all the planning, it wasn't until that moment that the reality of the ball set in for her. This was really going to happen and she was going to be a part of it, and it was only happening at all because of her. She couldn't believe how much her outlook had changed in just a few weeks. When she had moved into the house at the beginning of spring, she wouldn't have guessed she could ever be this happy. For the first time, Letitia allowed herself to hope that maybe she had a chance with the Earl. The thought had occurred to her before, but she had always dismissed it because of the disparity in their status and because he was lost in a fog of grief. But now, the world had turned and her prospects seemed brighter. Nor was she the only person who noticed the difference in temperament. "I don't know what you done to him, miss," said Betsy, "but right before the little one's unfortunate accident, I ain't never seen him so happy. I hope you're not planning on going anywhere, for his sake." "I intend to stay for as long as he'll let me," said Letitia, her cheeks flooding with warmth. "That ought to be a good long time, then, because he ain't going to let go of you. I've seen the way he looks at you. Men don't let go of a woman they look at like that." The statement so surprised Letitia that she burst out laughing. "If you say so, Betsy." "I do, miss. I do." Encouraged, Letitia felt a faint hope that maybe the Earl could grow to like her. In the days just before the accident, he had been treating her with an increased amount of respect, and it led her to believe that maybe he was warming toward her. But when he had left suddenly with Lydia, she had put it out of her mind, convinced that she was deluding herself. On the 6th day after his departure, he sent Letitia a letter saying Lydia had recovered completely and they would be returning shortly. On the following day at around noon, they pulled up into the drive in his red barouche, Lydia looking as healthy and lively as ever. The moment she saw Letitia, she scrambled down and threw her arms around her. "How are you doing?" asked Letitia, stroking her long braid. "All better?" "I am, and the doctor promised to take me on a boat voyage to Uxbridge the next time I visit," said Lydia eagerly. "Well, I hope you won't have any reason to visit him in the near future. You gave us both a scare." The three of them entered the warm study where she taught lessons. As I communicated, none of her bones were broken and the fall seems to have scared her more than anything else. The Earl gazed at Letitia intently, and she only just kept herself from squirming under his scrutiny. She held her features steady, fearing that her affection for him might be obvious. "But she is fully recovered now?" Letitia murmured. "In truth, we stayed a bit longer than necessary to have some time together. It was rewarding." His gaze shifted to his niece. Letitia drew Lydia into her arms and gave her another hug. The Earl continued. "Which leaves the mystery of what came over the horse. I hate to do it, but I think it might be time to retire Guinevere." "That might not be necessary." They all three turned in surprise. Gerard had entered the room and shut the door. Then, just as mysteriously, he strode over to the windows and closed the blinds, plunging into the room into semi-darkness. "Lord Mintford," he said, "I need to speak to you privately for a moment." With an uneasy feeling, Letitia made for the door. But then Gerard added, "She can stay. Lydia needs to leave." "Have you forgotten that I give the orders around here?" asked the Earl. But Gerard remained unflappable. "You're not going to want her to hear this." "Lydia," said the Earl softly, "I need you to leave for a minute. I'll come get you when we're ready." Reluctantly, Lydia left. Gerard waited until her footsteps had died in the hallway before turning back to the Earl. "As soon as you left, I took the liberty of examining the area where Lydia went riding. I knew I had to be quick about it. I hoped to find something that might account for Guinevere's odd behavior, and I wasn't disappointed." Reaching into his coat pocket, he pulled out a single small red object and held it up between two fingers. "It's a dart," said the Earl, his forehead creasing with concern. "It's as I suspected. That night after I finished my rounds, I took the dart up to my room and examined it. Someone had injected it with tranquilizer venom. Guinevere didn't collapse, she was put to sleep." "But that means—" Gerard nodded. "It means Lydia's fall was no accident." Letitia gasped and took a few steps closer to the Earl, her heart pounding. Lydia's fall had been scary enough on its own, but now Gerard was suggesting it had been arranged on purpose to harm her. But only someone living on the estate would have had the means and opportunity to do so. Supposing he was right, would something else be done that threatened Lydia's safety? "Are you absolutely sure about this?" asked the Earl, while Letitia's world seemed to wobble and sway on its axis. "Unless you have some other explanation for how this dart ended up under a fainting horse." "But why would anyone want to harm Lydia?" Letitia asked, still trying to make sense of his suspicions. "I'm not sure Lydia was the one they were trying to harm," said the Earl. To Gerard, he added, "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. For now, keep the dart on your person, I don't want it to go missing, and don't speak of this to anyone else." "Have you told anyone besides us?" "No one, my lord." "Good. I need you to keep the secret for a while longer. And, in the meantime, keep your eyes open." "I have been, and I will." Gerard gave a low bow and left the room, closing the door behind him. Letitia wasn't sure she understood what had just happened. The whole exchange left her with a feeling like ice in the pit of her stomach. "What's happening?" she asked. "I don't have any idea, Letitia." It was the first time she could ever remember him speaking her name. "But it worries me. It worries me more than I care to admit." After much wavering back and forth and plenty of discussion and speculation, the ball remained on the calendar and took place in the drawing room on the first night of June. The staff had cleared away the furniture, leaving a wide space in the middle of the room for dancing. On the Earl's orders, Letitia kept Lydia close, still worried that someone might try to hurt her. Since no one had asked her to dance, Letitia stood at the back of the room near a large wine cupboard watching the couples dancing and feeling a sense of accomplishment. Her family back home would have scoffed if she had said she could organize something of this magnitude, but the only reason she never had was because no one had ever given her the freedom. A feeling of warmth flooded her body at the thought of the trust the Earl had placed in her. He had danced with several women early in the evening, but now he stood near a window at the opposite end of the room drinking champagne with a melancholy air. Occasionally his eye strayed over to her and she had the feeling, that was at once thrilling and scary, that he wanted to offer her a dance. But he hung back, whether because he was reticent or because her position in the house made it impossible. It was the night's bitterest irony that she had organized a party in which she wasn't allowed to participate. Finally, as if making up his mind, the Earl set his glass down on a pier table and came striding across the room toward her. Letitia waited with a thrill of nerves and anticipation. "I've danced with almost every woman here tonight," he said, "but I realized there's one person I haven't danced with yet." "You haven't danced with me yet, Uncle," Lydia said with a smile. "So I haven't," he responded with a laugh. "Shall we?" Lydia giggled and joined her uncle on the dance floor. Letitia watched them with affection. Lydia placed her small feet on the Earl's, and he danced her around the room with abandon. When the music stopped, he brought her back to Letitia. "And now, it is our turn," he said, his eyes luminous and dark on hers. Flustered, Letitia struggled to think of an appropriate response. Is a governess allowed to dance with an Earl? To her surprise, the Earl flung his head back and laughed. His breath smelt faintly of champagne and canary wine, though he didn't look remotely tipsy. "It is if I say it is. What does it matter what anyone else thinks? Dance with me just once." Letitia hesitated, feeling like she was on the brink of something momentous. She had been only minutes away from making her big announcement, the one she had been awaiting during the entire ball. But on second thought, she would rather make it now than wait until after their dance had ended. "One moment," she said to the Earl. Standing to her full height, she said in her melodious voice, "Attention, everyone. I would like you to know that as of this moment, the garden is open. There will be music and all of you are welcome to go out and enjoy the night air." There was a collective murmur of surprise and excitement as guests began leaving the room. No need for Letitia to explain where the garden was, most of them had been there before, and thus, they knew. But the Earl hung back, looking impressed and also bothered. "Why didn't you tell me you were going to open the garden to visitors? I wanted to surprise you." A note of worry crept into her voice. Had she done the wrong thing? Should she have consulted him first? "I'm sorry we never talked about it, but I thought you would be happy." "It wasn't your place," he replied in a clipped voice. "Maybe if you had asked me beforehand, and we had made the decision together, I would feel differently about it." But Uncle, you let me go out there," Lydia interrupted. Letitia was still registering the hurt and betrayal on his face when his expression changed to one of terror. "Letitia, Lydia," he cried. "Move over. Quick!" Letitia was suddenly afraid and cold all over. "What's going on?" "Letitia," he shouted so loudly that guests froze and flinched on the other end of the room. Grabbing her and Lydia by their arms, the Earl pulled them away from the wine cabinet just as it toppled over in a shower of glass and porcelain and splintered wood. The noise was deafening, and it immediately brought all music and conversation to a halt. If the Earl hadn't pulled them to safety, she and Lydia would have been standing right there where the cabinet fell. They would be dead. Chapter 7. The ball ended early, and the guests were summarily dismissed. They returned to their carriages muttering darkly about the harshness of their host and the bad luck that seemed to plague Marston Hall. The Earl took Lydia to her bed to tuck her in and stay with her, and Letitia allowed Gerard to lead her to her room. Shutting the door, she undressed and climbed into bed, feeling badly frightened. This was much worse than the night when she'd heard the screams coming from the attic. How long ago that seemed now. Because even then, she had known in her heart that she was living a fiction, but this was different. She didn't think the wine cabinet had fallen on accident any more than Guinevere had keeled over of her own accord. What she wanted more than anything was for Lawrence to tell her she was overreacting, to take her in his arms and kiss her cheek and promise to keep her safe. She wished he had been the one to lead her to bed, but of course, he had to see to Lydia. She was weeping softly when there came a knock at the door, which she had locked upon entering the room. She froze, wondering who it was on the other side, wondering if they could be trusted. "Letitia, are you still awake?" came the Earl's voice. "It is I." Surprised but relieved, Letitia rose and hurried to the door. The Earl came in bearing a decanter of brandy and an empty glass. "Lydia is sleeping, and I've set Gerard outside her door. Rebecca wanted to bring this up to you herself," he said. "She's been worried about you ever since she heard about the cabinet. I told her that I would bring it to you." Letitia took the decanter gratefully. "Rebecca is welcome to come up if she likes. I'm sorry we had to end the dance so abruptly." The Earl shrugged in resignation. "So many bad things have happened in this place that by this point I've almost come to expect it. Sometimes I think I should sell the place and move far away. I've lived here too long, and the accumulation of memories is overwhelming." He sighed and a strange look came over his face. For a quick moment, it looked as if he were going to reach out to her, but then he clenched his hands at his side. "I shall go back to Lydia's room now. I am glad that you're all right." She nodded, and he bid her good night and left. A moment later, Rebecca came into the room. She was wearing a worn blue dress with a large bow at the back and a bonnet. There was dirt under her fingernails. Letitia had the impression she had spent much of the night working in the conservatory. She didn't question the fact that Rebecca was there, considering that they'd opened the garden for the evening. "I didn't see you come," said Letitia. "Were you here all the time? Were you working?" "When you get to be my age," Rebecca said sadly, "you start to lose interest in balls and parties. Those are for the young, and they're welcome to them." Lifting the decanter off the nightstand, she filled the glass up to the top. "Here, you'll feel better after you've had some of this." "Thank you." Letitia took the glass and drank deeply. "Apart from the Earl and Lydia, you're probably the closest friend I have here. I know I don't say this often, but I appreciate it." "You don't have to thank me." Rebecca laughed lightly. "I sometimes think it's lucky we can't know everything about our friends, or else we wouldn't have any. Finish your drink, dear." Letitia took another sip. The brandy burned at the back of her throat. "Maybe not," she said with an effort. "We don't all have dark secrets lurking at the back of our wardrobe." "No, and I suppose the secrets of an old woman such as myself would seem trivial and boring to most. Talking to the staff, I think they get the impression I'm an old spinster who never married. It would probably surprise them to know that I've been married for almost 20 years. This came as a surprise to Letitia, who had never before heard her mention her husband. "Why have you never mentioned this before?" "Sometimes it's best not to." Rebecca reached over and placed a hand on Letitia's forehead as though checking for fever, then brought it to rest on her shoulder. "For example, if you were hired to work at an estate and the owner of the place had a long-standing grudge against your husband, you might want to keep it a secret." Letitia glanced warily at Rebecca, perplexed by her choice of example. But of course, this is all hypothetical. Isn't it? Oh, to be sure, said Rebecca. And then you would be free to carry out your husband's vendetta against him without risk of anyone linking you. As far as anyone knows, you're just the gardener. She tightened her grip on Letitia's shoulder as she said this, and Letitia's heart fluttered in panic. Unless she was very much mistaken, and maybe it was the brandy affecting her, Rebecca seemed to be confessing something important. But her head was beginning to cloud, and she was having trouble making sense of her words. She wished Lawrence were still there in the room with them. She wished Rebecca would let go of her shoulder. "You're hurting me," she said weakly. "Please, let go." But Rebecca ignored her. You see, two can commit a crime as long as no one ever thinks to connect them. One can do the planning and the other can carry it out. Though in the end, I suppose one ends up doing most of the work. Killing the old gardener, tranquilizing the horses, unscrewing the bolts of the wine cabinet, poisoning the brandy. Even in a brandy-induced fog, there was no longer any mistaking Rebecca's meaning. Unless this was some horrible joke, and she very much doubted it was, Letitia had made a serious mistake in trusting Rebecca. A mistake that was likely going to cost her life. "Don't bother trying to fight it," said Rebecca in an oddly soothing tone. "You've been dead from the moment the brandy touched your lips. What is it Let says? In thee there is not half an hour of life. Then it was you who tried to kill Lawrence and Lydia." Rebecca bowed modestly. Lydia was just an unfortunate casualty. It took a few minutes for the potion to have its effect, and by the time it did, Lawrence had already dismounted. "I promised myself I would get it right the next time, but, as you saw tonight, I miscalculated again. Lucky for him, not so much for you. But judging by his huge reaction, I figured that killing you is going to hurt him very much indeed. And then, I shall have the pleasure of ending his life next. I'll let the girl live." Letitia shut her eyes, struggling to think amid the fog that was slowly enveloping her brain. She could try to call for the Earl, but it wouldn't do any good. She was already minutes away from death, and at this point, there was nothing he could do to save her. Still, at least she would be able to warn him, and to say goodbye before she died. She felt an overwhelming sadness to be leaving him. She wondered what death was like, and whether it would hurt horribly. "Are you all right, dear?" asked Rebecca, in a tone of mock sympathy. "I must say you're not looking well. Why are you doing all this?" Letitia couldn't help asking. "It's funny. I thought you would have figured that out by now," said Rebecca. "My family wants the money. More to the point, we want the estate. Lawrence is going to wish he hadn't spent the past 15 years ignoring his brother and his brother's wife." Reaching over Letitia's head, Rebecca pulled a large pillow from the bed. "Forgive me for rushing this, dear, but I'm afraid it's not going fast enough. Have you finished saying your prayers? Are you ready to meet your end?" Letitia's eyes widened in horror as Rebecca brought the pillow down over her face. She screamed, "Lawrence! Help! Someone help me!" But her words were muffled and warbled in the pillow. "I'm afraid no one is coming to save you, dearie," said Rebecca with an eerie chuckle. But at that moment, the door of the room burst open and Lawrence entered holding a pistol, his eyes blazing wrath. "Drop it," he said in a tone of deadly menace. With a groan of annoyance, Rebecca threw down the pillow and raised her hands over her head. Letitia drew in a series of sharp, agonized breaths. "How much did you hear?" asked Rebecca. "Enough to put you away for the rest of your life, which I don't think will be very long. They're going to hang you for murder and conspiracy to murder, and I hope your death is drawn out and painful." "It won't be," said Rebecca. With unnerving serenity, she lifted the decanter of brandy off the nightstand. "I still have a way out." She drank straight from the decanter without bothering to pour the brandy into a glass. She drank in long gulps, without pausing for breath, until she had consumed at least a quarter of the decanter. Then, with a smug smirk of satisfaction, she slammed it back down on the nightstand. "There," she said, wiping her mouth. "I'll be dead before you can even send for the authorities." "No, you won't." Something in the tone of his voice gave Rebecca pause. "Would you like to time it?" she replied. For the first time since he had entered the room, Lawrence allowed himself a smile. "Letitia's not dying, and neither are you. When you handed me the brandy, I suspected something was wrong. I wondered why you were here. And why you weren't dressed for a party. It made no sense. And then, there was something in your eyes that niggled at me. I knew you from somewhere before. I couldn't place it, but something wasn't right. The moment you left the room, I poured the brandy out and replaced it with a fresh decanter. Then I followed you, dear sister-in-law, and waited. In her whole life, Letitia thought she had never seen an expression as hideous as the one that came over Rebecca's face when she realized the brandy was safe to drink. "No," she cried. With his pistol still pointed at Rebecca, Lawrence came over to Letitia's side. "Are you all right?" "I think so," she replied, feeling a rush of gratitude toward him like she had never felt before. "I'm just a little inebriated, is all." She let out an embarrassingly loud hiccup, and her cheeks reddened in shame. Lydia's parents returned unexpectedly from India at the end of the summer. Having heard about the recent events at Marston Hall, they were eager to be reunited with their daughter and relieved that Rebecca hadn't succeeded in killing her or the Earl. "Under the circumstances, we think Lydia had better come home with us," said Mr. Haringey, Lydia's father. "No offense is meant, of course. I would just sleep more easily knowing she was with her parents." "So would I," said the Earl. Though things seem to have settled down at the moment now that Rebecca and Brian are awaiting trial. Later that afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Haringey took Letitia aside and asked if they could speak with her privately. Letitia followed them nervously into the ground-floor study, feeling sure she was about to be reprimanded. "Lydia and her uncle have had nothing but good things to say about you in the letters to us in India," said Mr. Haringey fervently. "By all accounts, Lydia couldn't have asked for a better governess. We would like to offer you an increase in salary, on one condition." "What condition is that?" "That you return with us to India," said Mrs. Haringey, "where every provision will be made for your security and welfare. You would be living quite as comfortably there as you do here in London. We would see to that." Letitia gulped, completely taken off guard. She had known that her position would be coming to an end if Lydia left. But she had fervently hoped that the Earl might declare himself to her. She knew it was wishful thinking on her part, but by then she was so in love with him that she could only pray he would return her affection. If she went to India, there would be no chance of that happening. "Mrs. Haringey, I'm flattered. Please let me think on it." "Of course," she replied. "It is a big decision." The next day, Lydia was thrilled one moment and morose the next. "I don't want to leave you," she told Letitia. "Please say you're coming." "I haven't decided," Letitia answered. She had been thinking on the offer every spare moment. She realized that she was likely deluding herself with the idea that Lawrence loved her. Perhaps she should travel to India. She loved Lydia, and she would have to leave this place once Lydia was gone anyway. Where would she go? Back home? The idea filled her with dread. There was nothing for her at home. Not anymore. "Letitia?" Letitia gave a start and then hugged her young student. "Maybe I should go to India with you after all," she said. Lydia gasped and then jumped up and ran from the room. Letitia watched her go with a sad smile. The garden had been left open since the evening of the ball. Letitia had taken advantage of it, wandering out amongst the beauty every chance she got. A new gardener had not yet been secured, though she knew the Earl was working on it. "There you are." She turned and watched the Earl move toward her. There was something in his expression which gave her pause. Was he angry? And if so, why? "Lydia's told me." And then she understood. He knew she would likely be traveling to India with the Haringeys. "You're leaving," he said. She looked into his dark eyes. "I would be leaving anyway," she said softly. "You hardly need a governess when you have no child to care for." He frowned as if not having realized that sooner. He took her elbow and steered her over to a bench set back in a lovely grove of trees. She sat and he sat beside her. "I don't want you to go." She sucked in her breath and searched his face. Had she heard him correctly? He said no more, only kept looking at her with an intensity that set her mind spinning. "Why not?" she whispered. His gaze softened, like a caress. She found herself painfully conscious of his masculine appeal. She clasped her hands together, forcing them to her lap. The very air around them was alive and filled with tension. Because he reached over and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Because I would miss you. She swallowed and felt a ripple of excitement. Her pulse skittered alarmingly. Why? Because, he said, and their eyes locked and their breathing became in unison. Because I love you. And then he leaned forward and brushed his lips across hers. She inhaled sharply at the contact. Of course, we must be married, he said, tracing her jaw with his finger. If you'll have me. If she'd have him? She wanted to shout her agreement. She wanted to bury herself in him and never break away. He kissed her again, but this time his kiss was urgent and exploratory. She responded in kind, shocking herself with her response. Slowly, he drew away. You didn't answer me. She laughed then, a light airy sound that floated up through the garden. Yes, she said. My answer is yes. He grabbed her to himself then, crushing her in a mighty hug. She laughed again and nestled into his neck. Lawrence, she said, using his name tenderly. Hum. I guess I'd better go tell Lydia the news. He chuckled and released her, looking into her eyes. She won't like it. No. She won't, Letitia replied. But we'll be related now. We'll be family. Family, he repeated, standing up. He drew her to her feet, and together they went back inside the house to break the news. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Grace Austen. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Grace Austen, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Grace Austen romance.